The sun stretched across the morning sky, casting golden hues over Medina. The Balogan market buzzed with life, traders calling out prices, women balancing baskets, and akara sellers shouting for customers. At a wooden stall near the entrance, Mama Kemi adjusted her basins of gari, rice, and beans. She wiped sweat from her forehead, already weary, though the day had just begun. 5 years had passed since she lost her husband in a motorcycle accident, leaving the stall as her only means of survival. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, Kemi and Malik, but it was never enough. School fees were a struggle, and they had been sent home more times than she could count. A small, frail boy approached. He was barefoot, his oversized t-shirt hanging loosely on his thin frame. Shifting from foot to foot, he hesitated before whispering, "Auntie, please, can I have small gari?" Mama Kemi studied him. He couldn't be more than 8 years old. Something about him seemed different. She scooped a handful of gari into a tin cup and handed it to him. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Toby." Before she could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the crowded market. The next day, Toby returned. "Auntie, please, just small gari." Again, Mama Kemi gave him some, and again he disappeared into the crowd. This continued for nearly 2 weeks. Every morning he arrived, collected his cup of gari, and left. But unlike other street kids, he never begged elsewhere, never caused trouble, never lingered. By the second week, Mama Kemi grew curious. When he reached for his usual tin cup, she pulled it back. "Toby," she said firmly, "why aren't you in school? Where are your parents?" His fingers twitched. For the first time, he looked trapped. After a long pause, he whispered, "I don't have parents." That night, as Mama Kemi walked home, she couldn't shake the thought of him. She had seen many abandoned children in the market, but something about Toby felt different. Her home was small, just a single room and parlor. Feeding another mouth seemed impossible. Yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw him. The next morning, as Mama Kemi arranged her goods, she made up her mind. When Toby arrived, she watched him closely. "Toby," she said softly, "where do you sleep?" He pointed down the road. "Show me." She followed him through winding market paths, past shops closing for the night, until they reached an uncompleted building. Inside, torn cartons were spread across the cold concrete floor. "This is where you sleep?" she asked, her throat tightening. Toby nodded. A cold wind swept through the empty structure. Mama Kemi wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the child before her. She was a woman who had nothing, yet she couldn't turn away. She knelt before him and whispered, "Come, let's go home." Mama Kemi led Toby into her small home. Kemi and Malik looked up from their shared plate of jollof rice, surprised to see him. "Who is this?" Kemi asked. Mama Kemi sighed, setting down her market baskets. "This is Toby. He'll be staying with us for now. He has no home." Malik frowned. "Where has he been staying?" "In an uncompleted building." Kemi and Malik exchanged glances. They knew what it meant to struggle. Kemi scooted over and patted the space beside her. "Come and eat." Toby hesitated, looking at Mama Kemi for permission. She nodded. Slowly, he lowered himself onto the mat and picked up a spoon. He ate carefully, as though afraid the food would be taken away. Mama Kemi watched him closely, her heart tightening. She had taken him in out of pity, but now, what next? Over the next few weeks, Toby settled into their routine. In the mornings, he helped Mama Kemi carry basins of gari to the market. At home, he fetched water, roasted ground nuts, and played games with Malik. Slowly, the quiet, withdrawn boy began to smile more often. One evening, as they shared roasted corn outside, Mama Kemi turned to him. "Toby, where did you live before coming to the market?" Toby hesitated. "I don't remember." Mama Kemi frowned. A child doesn't just forget home. And there was something else. His speech was too polished for a boy who had lived on the streets. Something wasn't right. That night, as she lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, she made a decision. Toby needed to go to school. The next morning, Mama Kemi pulled Toby aside. "Toby, have you been to school before?" He hesitated, as he always did when asked about his past. Mama Kemi sighed. "Anyway, I think it's time for you to start school." Toby's eyes widened. "Me?" She nodded. She had saved enough to enroll him in a nearby government school. It wasn't much, but it was something. Toby jumped up and hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mama Kemi," she laughed, ruffling his short hair. She didn't know why helping him felt so right, but it did, and it would be the best decision she had ever made. She just didn't know it yet. That fateful morning, Malik and Kemi left for school, while Mama Kemi and Toby headed to the bank. The roads were alive with buses, hawkers, and workers in crisp office clothes. Mama Kemi adjusted her purse, feeling the money inside. Weeks of careful savings had finally given her enough for Toby's school fees. Beside her, Toby walked eagerly, gripping the side of her wrapper like a small child clinging to his mother. "Stay close," she warned as they entered First Bank. The bank was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the noisy market. People stood in neat lines, waiting their turn. Mama Kemi withdrew the folded money from her bag, focused on the teller. She didn't notice the old man standing behind her in line, but the man, a thin, gray-haired figure in a white caftan, noticed Toby. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and in a shaky voice he whispered, "My God, it's him, it's the missing boy." Mama Kemi's heart stopped. She turned to the old man, confusion flooding her face. "Excuse me?" she asked, gripping Toby's hand tighter. The man stepped closer. "This boy, he is the Bellows son." Murmurs spread through the bank. Mama Kemi felt unease settle in her chest. "Baba, what are you saying?" The old man nodded eagerly. "His picture was on TV. They even mentioned a reward. But I don't know the family personally. I only remember their name, Bello." Mama Kemi glanced at Toby. He stood frozen, his face a mix of confusion and fear. She studied him carefully, searching for a sign, a memory, a recognition in his eyes. But Toby only looked lost. After a pause, Mama Kemi sighed. "I don't know if I can believe you, Baba. This boy has been with me for weeks. I found him sleeping in an uncompleted building. I cannot simply trust you." The old man hesitated but remained firm. Mama Kemi exhaled. "Fine. If you are so sure, follow me to my shop at the market. If you can find the family, bring them to me. I will not let this boy be taken away unless I see proof." The old man nodded quickly. As they walked back to the market, Mama Kemi glanced at Toby. "Toby, do you remember anything?" she asked softly. He shook his head. For the first time since she had taken him in, she realized she might lose him, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. Across town, inside a well-furnished duplex, a woman sat by the window, clutching a photograph of her missing son. She had barely slept in 2 months. Her once bright eyes were hollow with grief. They had done everything, gone to the police, hired private investigators, placed announcements on TV, radio, and billboards. But there was no trace of Toby. Her husband, Chief Bello, tried to remain strong, but she saw how his shoulders slumped, how he stared at the door at night as though waiting for their son to walk in. She thought of the day he disappeared. It had been an ordinary afternoon. Toby had been playing outside their gated compound. The house help had gone to bring in laundry, and in those few minutes, her son had vanished. No ransom was ever demanded. For weeks she had prayed, screamed, searched, nothing, until her phone rang that night, and a voice said, "Madam, your son has been found." The next day, just before noon, a black Mercedes pulled up near Mama Kemi's shop. A beautiful woman stepped out, her eyes wild with desperation. "My son, where is he? Where is he?" she cried, rushing forward. The elderly man from the bank was beside her. The commotion drew attention. Kemi and Malik stepped outside, and then she saw him. The woman gasped. Her breath caught in her throat. "Toby!" Her voice cracked. "Ah, Toby, my son. Thank you, God." She fell to her knees, sobbing as she pulled him into her arms. Toby blinked in shock. Then, slowly, realization dawned. "Mama?" His voice trembled. "Mama!" he cried again, clinging to her, his small hands grabbing at her dress, his own tears spilling freely. Just then, Chief Bello approached, tall and dignified in his navy agbada, his eyes full of emotion. He placed a shaking hand on Toby's head before pulling both mother and son into a tight embrace. Toby clung to them. "Mommy, I got lost. I tried. Mrs. Bello kissed his forehead, over and over, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Mama Kemi watched quietly, tears welling in her own eyes, and yet her heart ached. When the tears settled, Mrs. Bello turned to Mama Kemi. Her eyes were still red, but her voice was steady. "Mama Kemi, you are the reason I'm holding my son today." Mama Kemi waved a hand dismissively, forcing a small smile. "A child is a child. No mother should ignore one in need." Mrs. Bello shook her head. "No, you don't understand. You did what many wouldn't. You took him in, you fed him, you treated him as your own. Anything could have happened to him on the streets." She reached forward, taking Mama Kemi's hands in hers. "Please, I need you and your children to come visit us next Saturday. Our home is your home now." Mama Kemi blinked in shock. "You don't have to, Ma." Chief Bello nodded. "Yes, it would mean a lot to Toby and to us." Mama Kemi looked at Toby, who pleaded silently with his eyes. She exhaled. How could she say no? "All right, we will come." And for the first time since that morning, a wide, bright smile spread across Toby's face. The following Saturday, Mama Kemi, Kemi, and Malik arrived at the Bellows' home. The estate was quiet, lined with beautiful houses and trees. It was a world far from their own. A maid welcomed them inside. The house smelled of delicious food, and chandeliers sparkled above them. Toby rushed to greet Kemi and Malik before running into Mama Kemi's arms. He never left her side, holding on to her arm, beaming with joy. During lunch, Mrs. Bello turned to Mama Kemi, emotion deep in her eyes. "We brought you here today, not just to say thank you, but because we want to appreciate you and your children." She reached into her purse and placed a sealed brown envelope in Mama Kemi's hands. "This is just a small gift, a way to say thank you for all you have done." Mama Kemi frowned, opening it hesitantly, and gasped. Inside was a check, an amount that made her hands tremble. Enough to open a real shop, enough to never struggle again, enough to send Kemi and Malik to school without worry. "This is too much," she whispered. Chief Bello smiled. "No, it is not even enough. You brought joy back into our home. We want to bring joy into yours too." Tears filled her eyes. For so long she had struggled, and now, in the most unexpected way, life was rewarding her.